Hello, Darklings! So this is a topic I, surprisingly enough, have not properly covered yet, considering how much I've mentioned it, which is vampires. One of the longest objects of study for me, and kind of what shaped me into the spooky kid I am today, was my budding interest in vampires as a kid. And the thing is with vampires is that they have been prevalent in mythology, folklore, and just cultures all around the world for millennia, and it's very interesting because different countries will say that this and this stipulates a vampire versus this and this, and it all just depends on region, and not even country, just region within a country, especially the ones that I studied the most, which would be Slavic and European, primarily Eastern European vampires, which is the most popular traditional ones because Western vampires are just the ones that are more well known. You also have a very wide variety of different ways that people become vampires, what can kill a vampire, and then the possibility of what really happened and how that myth circulated. For example, in a lot of Eastern European mythology and folklore, children that were born with a caul, which is a membrane that stretches over the top of the head, or milk teeth, were destined to return from the dead once they died. So they were born with a death sentence. Children that were exceptionally ugly, children that feared the shadow of a church. There are all kinds of crazy, crazy things that made people think that their child would end up being a vampire, or that their neighbor would end up being a vampire, or different ways to dispel them, how to kill them once they've actually come back to life. There have been a great number of historical ones. Anyway, so oddly enough, this thing looks super sketchy, because it kind of is, and you can get it at Barnes & Noble, and it's sort of kind of childlike. This was a pretty good reference to start with for me, which was the Compendium of Vampires and Other Perilous Creatures by supposedly Cornelius Van Helsing. And this is a very interesting idea, and this has vampires from around the world listed in alphabetical order and includes other things such as nixies, ogres, ghouls, all kinds of things. And this was actually a pretty good basis of reference before I started to want to know more. And I have a fascination with folklore and mythology. I've made that really clear, especially for anybody who's watched more than a couple of my videos. Like, I really do like my research. I'm a major research nerd. This is also a good source of reference, Vampire, the Complete Guide to the World of the Undead. So this has all kinds of stuff in it. It has different myths and popular culture stuff. It has different historical vampires. It has film references, and tons and tons of pictures and woodcuts. It's kind of a fun one. This is a good one. Probably one of the first ones that I started when I did my research was the Encyclopedia of Vampires, Werewolves, and Other Monsters. I got this off of Amazon. This is a gigantic, fantastic point of research. Because it covers all kinds of things. It covers Dracula, Fright Night, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It covers Nosferatu. It covers different actors that are known. It covers lycanthropy. It covers Sheridan Le Fanu, Charlene Harris, Anne Rice. It covers all kinds of stuff that basically is the foundation of modern vampire, werewolf, and whatnot lore. So that's fun. But I know not everybody has the time or the drive to do a crazy amount of weird person research like I do. I have strange hobbies and no real life, and that's okay. I like it that way. It's fine. Anyway, so I figured that this was an opportune time to start this sort of lecture. It's nearing Halloween. Everybody's kind of picking up on all their favorite ghouls. And why not cover vampires, since they seem to be a long-lasting favorite? They have been a staple in cinema since the beginning. From the whole thing with Nosferatu being the first film adaptation of Dracula and the ensuing lawsuit. But it keeps going on and on and on, and many different incarnations, different mythologies that have been woven together by different writers in both novels and in films. And it's just, everybody has their own take on it, and there's a lot of different ideas. Like, for one, the stake through the heart thing was never properly founded. It was more a pinning to the grave bed was the foundation of that myth, and was often done with either rosewood, silver, or iron. It didn't necessarily have to be wood. It was just pinning them back into their graves so they cannot come back up. Decapitation, shoving the mouthful of garlic or a brick was also very common. Different things were said to dispel different vampires. Some is very Christian, which is crosses and holy water, sacred icons, and others it has absolutely nothing to do with religion. Some dates back to Egyptian times, dealing with the concept of demons invading our realm and possessing mortal bodies that then want to go forth and drink the blood of those around them. The main reason for aversion to sunlight is sun was supposed to be a symbol of purity. So in some respects, like some cultures will say that vampires were repulsed by gold because it was the metal that reminded them of the sun. And then there's also a lot of different myths about them being able to transform or what their prey is, because some, they are specific in that they will only drink the blood of humans, or some will only drink the blood of men, and some will only drink the blood of women, and it just really depends on what breed, what region you're looking into. And then, of course, there's all these historical vampires. One of the most famous would be Elizabeth Bathory from Hungary, the Bloody Countess. I've mentioned her a few times. I've painted a necklace about her. I've talked about the Julie Delpy film, The Countess. And that's definitely a very interesting one because it was never quite proven. Like, no one exactly knows if her psyche just snapped or what, but she really did murder hundreds of girls. And it's very strange. And I mean, vampirism in humans is not a real thing, and usually it's considered exceedingly dangerous because iron poisoning is a real thing. But there's all kinds of crazy, crazy mythology. And a lot of things that were in cultures that to be believed, but were kind of dispelled by modern science. So who even knows? One really good one, since, of course, you inevitably have to seeg into Dracula if you're going to be dealing with historical vampires. Speaking of, The Historian. This was actually a very, very good book, Elizabeth Kostova, and it's very well researched, and the majority of it is true. There are some things that have been changed, and then the ending is, of course, fictitious. But the thing is, with Vlad Tepes, Vlad the Impaler, the son of the dragon, the leader of the Order of the Dracul, and the king of Wallachia, is in his native country of Wallachia. He was lauded as a hero for helping fight against the Turks, the invading army that were the main cause of panic and danger to his people. Which is one of the reasons why I ended up appreciating the newest Dracula reincarnation, Dracula Untold, is it kind of goes back into that truth. Not totally, and there's definitely a lot of things that they're just like, we're just going to kind of use this. But I appreciate that effort, because the majority don't even try and touch upon that subject. Because the thing is, even though he was demonized by the rest of Europe, and definitely by the Turkish Empire, he did what he thought was right for his people, is generally the consensus if you speak to anybody from that region. He may have had unconventional and dangerous and, scary methods, what with the impaling people. But he was the historical influence for Bram Stoker. So this was an interesting book, and Dracula's Guest is the rejected first chapter of Dracula that ended up being published as a standalone short fiction piece from Bram Stoker. But this is a connoisseur's collection of Victorian vampire stories. So I got this from Barnes & Noble, and this is a very, very good collection because there are tons of classic ones in here. The Deathly Lover, Wake Not the Dead, The Vampire, Count Magnus. They have pieces of Varney the Vampire. They have Good Lady Duquesne, A True Story of a Vampire, tons and tons and tons. I don't know. The Mysterious Stranger is a really good one. But the thing is, before you go into each story in this particular book, they have an introduction that talks about the story and the connection to Bram Stoker in his influence of writing Dracula. For example, there was one female writer in here who was English and then moved to Hungary, and she's the reason why Bram Stoker picked up the word Nosferatu. It is not a real word. And I've mentioned this a few times. People have tried to fight me on it, and I was like, do you want me to pull up my giant stack of research? But the thing is, it was a fictitious word because this woman was a bit of a blowhard, and she's like, I'm going to publish a history on Transylvania because I know everything, despite the fact I have never been there. And it's very peculiar that she got that word because it is not even close to that region's terminology for vampire, which was upir. And vampire. And it's very peculiar that she got that word, which I think was similar to another word meaning witch or devil. I can't remember all of the particulars all the time. So that's kind of interesting. And then in modern culture, what I really do appreciate is lately, the thing that's been buzzed about a lot has been Guillermo del Toro's The Strain. One of the reasons why I am very appreciative of it is that they refer to it by one of the classic Balkan terms, which is strigoi. And that's a very old term and a very popular one when it comes to vampires, and it translates to the undead. And they kind of attack it, one, from a science fiction perspective of being a virus, and two, they incorporate some of the older historical things such as a stinger instead of fangs. And it's a very interesting concept. I mean, there's a very wide variety of things that have been incorporated into modern culture that I appreciate. Like, for anybody who's watched Hemlock Grove on Netflix, they call the vampires upir, and I do appreciate that, and I definitely figured that out really early on when they had a flashback sequence where one of the children was born with a caul, and so I immediately recognized what was going on. There's some things in that show that do not make any fucking sense, but there are some things in there that are very clever and very smart. So, there's tons of well adapted and tons of terribly adapted vampire films out there. I mean, you can ask anybody. It's pretty obvious. A lot of modern fiction writers have tried to tackle vampires in their own unique way. The biggest, worst, most pitiful failure of that way was probably Stephenie Meyer in her tawdry attempts at teen fiction. Anybody who says that the Twilight books are worth more than a laugh is clearly not supposed to be watching my videos. I prefer my vampires predatory because the number one rule that I've always thought was important to incorporate into any vampire story is that they are a killer first and anything else second, because they are designed in every aspect to be a predator, at least in all film and modern adaptations. And in all folklore. So yeah, they're supposed to be predators. It's one thing to romanticize a predator, that dangerous edge deal. It's another thing to completely ignore it. When you have characters such as Louis Pointe-du-Lac in the Anne Rice Chronicles, he's very sensitive, but he's still nonetheless a predator, and he does have to hunt to survive. Same with Lestat, but he kind of does the roguish villain thing well for him. And tragic backstories in vampires are also very common, very popular. And that's just kind of what you get when you have a character that was at one point in time human, lost their humanity, and then became immortal. Different ways, different adaptations that have been really good, as I'm a big Buffy the Vampire fan. I love that series. I watch it like once a year. I've mentioned it many times. So I love Buffy, and the way that they approach vampires is kind of interesting because, in all honesty, they're not really supposed to be vampires per se. None of the monsters are supposed to be monsters exactly. It's more extended metaphor, but nonetheless, the idea that their vampires were humans, and then when the demon goes into their body, their soul is gone. That's definitely an interesting concept, because then you do not have the tortured theme that you got with Angel, for example. Instead, you have things that mimic humans and are able to hunt them. Anyway, this is not as fluid as I initially planned, but I hope that you got something out of it. I hope this inspires you to look more into the roots of vampirism, if you want. I mean, it's definitely a major foundation for the Gothic subculture. It's actually the primary foundation for the Gothic subculture. I mean, Gothic subculture started off of black and white horror movies, primarily Dracula, Vampira, and then kind of just progressed. I mean, when you have a lot of these founding bands, most of them did try to look like space age vampires. For example, Specimen and Alien Sex Fiend kind of just wanted to look like space age vampires. And it's a major theme in modern culture. And I've been very repetitive. Anyway, till next time, Darklings.